Chapter 11 of Aleriel, or A Voyage to Other Worlds, by Wladislaw Lach-Szyrma. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Welcome home. I finished the first prayer that for ages perchance had arisen from that dead world, and then I set my ether car homewards, and plunged out again into vast and boundless space, not to earth, but to our bright world. At length, when some time had elapsed, such as men would count by weeks or months, our glorious world opened to my view, with its soft tints and white, misty clouds, lighted by the sun's blaze, and here and there the long ridges or the lofty peaks of the mountains. As I drew nearer it, thoughts of home gathered around me. Why had I left a world so lovely and so happy to dwell even for a while on one so fallen and so sad as earth is, or so utterly dead as its lifeless satellite, the twin homes of sin and death? Yet, on the other hand, I had succeeded in my enterprise, and entirely so. I had visited earth. I had seen all its beauties and its sorrows. I had mixed with men and been undetected by them. I had added immensely, not merely to my own, but to my fellow creatures' field of knowledge. Now they would be able to classify and criticize my information, and by it advance in their grasp of the knowledge of creation. Such thoughts passed through my mind as I directed my vessel through space to my own city, near the great southern ocean. Then I turned on the gravitating power and dashed at the speed of a cannonball towards the glorious and brilliant globe before me. Down, down I rushed, till the sea of vapour was close under my feet. It reminded me then of the scene I more than once had lingered over in the Alps. The white sea of mist stretched before me, with here and there, like islands in a lake, a few of the glittering mountains of our south polar continent. After all, the solar system is really akin, I said to myself. Surely our world is like to Earth, its sister in space. Down, down I rushed. The clouds were round me, one sea of white mist, and then I had dashed through the veil, and our glorious, our lovely world, the queen of beauty in the solar system, opened to my view. There all was just as I had left it. There were the tall mountain cliffs, huger far than the Himalayas, piercing up through the clouds into space. There were the soft tinted forests and the grey ocean, and the vast gardens of every delicate and tender hue. How could I leave such a world to be on the earth, with all its misery and sadness? I cried. And yet the earth has its beauty, its loveliness. The gaily coloured islands of the tropics, the green summer verdure of England, the virgin forests of America have their beauties, for God has made all things good, even on earth. So thought I as I sped on my way. There was our city, with its many hundred towers and hanging gardens, and its thousand fantastic roofs. It was my home. Home, even if poor on earth, is beloved. But who would not be proud of such a home, seeing its grandeur now, as for a year or more I had only looked on earthly cities? Some had reminded me feebly of my fair home, for instance Prague, with its mingled Eastern and Western architecture, and Edinburgh, and in some sense Paris. I made first for the overhanging mountain, and there rested my car on a ledge, and then, leaving it there in a quiet spot, flew over the city. As in duty bound, I made first for the temple of my ward, for we have 7 wards and 7 great temples in our city. Its lovely towers looked vast indeed, by contrast with everything I had seen on earth. And when I flew through the great circular door, like a rose window in the western gable, how glorious it appeared. I had of late seen Cologne Cathedral and St. Peter's at Rome, and York and Durham. How poor they all seemed in comparison with the church of our ward. There are three things in which we have an immeasurable advantage over men. We have immortality, for the powers of death have been conquered in us for ages, and so we need not waste our powers in the struggle how to live. We have had perfect peace without a possibility of war for thousands of years. We have a devotion to offer the vast resources in our power to the service of religion. So the poorest church of the smallest and most insignificant city in our world is grander than the finest cathedral or palace upon earth. Our powers are immeasurably vaster than those of man, yet you might do much if you had no war, and were to concentrate your powers on the arts of peace. As I entered, the service, of course, was going on. It has not ceased for ages. 4 choirs of winged choristers were raising their paeans of joy and thankfulness. Night and day the song is unceasing. As I rested on the capital of a pillar and looked on the 4 choirs in their robes of blue and red, green and purple, and heard the heavenly sound of many voices rolling through the lofty arches, soft and sweet and entrancing, now one choir, now another, now 2 combined, now all 4 together in one great chorus, I felt enthralled as I never felt before. How wonderful is our world! How thankful am I to God for his love in placing me here! So saying, I sank down gently on the pavement and prostrated myself, adoring. None seemed to heed me, though many saw and knew me. The worship went on, and the delicious song still swept over me, and through the aisles and vaults, until the time when the thunder signal marked the change in the course, and 4 other choirs, with solemn music, entered their places to continue the next watch of ceaseless adoration. Then I arose, and going out with the choir as I reached the garden, was met by many kindly greetings. "Dear brother, we are glad to see you home and happy. Tell us of the earth," was said by many of my comrades. "Let me go to the prince of the ward, and then I shall tell you all. I have 1,000 things to say, only I know not how to begin. Only now I shall say how much I love my home, and how glad you all should be of dwelling where you are." So saying, followed by a friendly crowd, with many loving greetings, I came to the palace of the ward. Here in the outer court sat our prince upon his crystal throne, ready to welcome me, for many had seen me flying over the city, but none had spoken to me till I had finished my worship at the Most High. "Welcome, Aleriel," he said, "home. God has preserved you in a long and perilous voyage, such as none save the princes of the sun and the great spirit messengers of the highest have yet taken. Welcome. Tell us of your journey." "I have so many thoughts, I know not how to tell them. It is a sad, a sorrowful world, that beautiful planet of the single satellite, our twin sister in space. There is sin there, and death, and suffering, and disease, and war. I have seen all, much that is sad and terrible, such as we never even think of in our happy world. And yet it is beautiful. What God has made is beautiful, and that world is beautiful. Not quite as lovely as ours, yet very lovely sometimes, and it is larger than ours. It has greater oceans and vaster continents. It is in some way fitted for happiness, and perhaps there is a something nobler and grander in man than in us. But in his earth life man has no hope of perfect happiness, though on earth he is often fitted for perfect happiness in another life, when the penalty of sin has been paid and the redemption been accepted. We ought, Aleriel, to be thankful to the Most High that we have been placed here, and not on that beautiful planet, our sister world in creation. It seems you have seen much sorrow and evil that you never would have known of had you not ventured over the abyss of space. At my request, the prince sent for my car from its mountain ledge. It was soon brought down to me and placed in the palace hall. Here I opened the larger case in which I had placed the packets of my earth curiosities. First and chief, there were closely packed some thousands of photographs of Earth's chief cities and scenes from almost every land. This alone would have given months of study, but I had other things: some earth flowers pressed and dried, a phial of ocean and of fresh water for our naturalists to study, a pocket Bible, several specimens of Earth's rocks, a few coins of different states, some pieces of polished woods. No animal or even insect could have lived in the airless realms of ether through which I had passed, so all I brought was dead. Dead as the meteoric stones, the sole link in matter between the Earth and other systems in space. Living beings only of the highest order and the most vigorous vitality can pass from world to world and live. So nothing earthly could exist even 100 miles away from its own orb. Man is a prisoner to his world. These curiosities excited much attention and interest. Thousands were the questions I had to answer. Everything was examined, not merely with the naked eye, but with the microscopes that most of our citizens are wont to carry with them to investigate and admire any of the beauties of nature that attract their attention. Small shreds of many of the substances were taken by our chemists for analysis, to be quite sure that the elements of matter in our sister world would be exactly the same as we had in our planet. At once the news spread by electricity all over our world, and strangers from many far-off cities came to converse with me and to see the earth specimens I had brought. It was indeed with us just as it would be with you, if anyone from another planet had come to Earth with curiosities belonging to that distant world. What an excitement there would be in every intelligent society, in every city, in every university, at every observatory. But alas, what wrangling would ensue! Not so with us. All I knew, I spoke only the truth, and that these things were really the product of our sister world, the Earth. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Aleriel, or A Voyage to Other Worlds, by Wladislaw Lach-Szyrma. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Earth as Others See It. It was a solemn, yet a sublime moment when I was called on to address the wisest and noblest of the inhabitants of our world, and tell them of my visit to the earth. The assembly was vast. Millions were gathered along the ledges of the cliffs, and on the slopes, and on the lower plain of the ring crater wherein the assembly was gathered. I stood by the prince of our city and sundry of the great leaders of our nation upon the central platform, where, amidst the insignia of our cities, I looked down on the gathered host. Around me were the rings of microphones and telephones to carry my voice to the uttermost circle of that multitude. The host, with all their robes of varied tints, made a gorgeous spectacle, while the grand natural scenery of the crater and its many cliffs was adorned in every part by banners and insignia. I have never seen such a spectacle since the Prince of the Sun came with his message to us. When the assembly gathered, the signal was given by the sound of cannon, for the opening hymn for every national or general assembly was commenced by a tribute of praise to the Most High. Then from 1,000,000 voices burst the long and mighty paean of praise, with the soft music of 10,000 harps and trumpets. My spirit was moved to its depths as I looked down on the vast host before me, and thought of God's love to me in giving me so bright and glorious a world to live in. What a contrast to the earth, torn by strife, desolated by sin, stained by sorrow, suffering, misery. What a still greater contrast to the miserable dead world I had just left. Then, as the majestic song of 1,000,000 voices died away, the prince of our nation arose and waved his sceptre and bade silence, and all was still, as though no living being were in that huge crater. Then he spake. Citizens of the bright world, listen. Aleriel, our brother, has come back from earth by divine permission. The awful journey through space has been achieved. Our prayers have been heard. Welcome him home, he spake, and then from 1,000,000 voices came the chanted song, Aleriel, welcome home. I cannot tell you the thrill of that loving welcome. You cannot understand it now, but yet you may, in a future state, know the sweet welcome to a realm of bliss by angel voices. Then he said aloud, that all might hear, Aleriel, tell us of your journey. I was moved in spirit, and yet I rose and spoke. Thanks, comrades of a happy land. Be grateful for God's love to you. The story of my journey is very long, for I have seen so many million things which you hardly know of, for to me they were unknown until I saw them. I have been in that strange planet that so often lightens our evenings when we see the outer skies through openings in the silvery mists. I have seen it. I have walked on it. I have twice travelled round it. I have visited its cities, traversed its oceans, crossed its continents, ascended its mountains. Man I have seen also, the ruling intelligence of that world. I have beheld man in his various races, in his struggles for higher things, in his sorrows, in his agonies, in his death. I have seen some noble things on earth, very many wretched and miserable things, not a few very terrible, to us inconceivably terrible. I have beheld men struggling against their misery, and in vain I have witnessed starvation, want, disease, in 1,000 loathsome forms of death. I have seen the wretched selfishness of man, grasping for self only, the weak crushed by the strong, and the strong still insatiate. It is a world in which there are many terrible and horrible and despicable things, and a few noble or glorious. Yet as to the world itself, it is, like all God's work, good of itself. Nature on earth is often very beautiful. In some things it rivals in loveliness our world. In the evenings, often the silvery light of the satellite gives it a mysterious and soft beauty, such as we have not, and by day even many a scene is grand and brilliant. That green gem-like island south of the great continent is very beautiful, and so in colder regions are many parts of the fair isles west of the great continent. The regions round the equator are full of splendid scenes. Even colder realms, in their frequent changes, have great variety, some silvery in whiteness, when the moist rain falls frozen to the earth in flakes, or in spring green, or in summer of many hues, growing more sober as winter comes. The oceans are grand also, and the storms, when the blue waters are silvered with foam. Yes, God made all things good, even on earth. It is only man that makes them vile. How strange it seems, that bond of man to evil, that clinging to the bad, even of those who wish to be good and to love the good. It seems like an evil nature, a secret spiritual power, marring God's creation on earth, which over us has never had any influence. Yet men who conquer this evil, how noble they grow, how majestic in spirit. The very struggle makes them nobler, stronger in spirit, grander even than we are. Such souls as good men have are fitted for a higher existence, not only than earth, but even than our lovely world can offer. Our natures are soft and gentle and simple, but we have never known the struggle against sin and sorrow that men know. I have seen many things that you never can see on our world. I have seen the hospital, men and women struggling with death in dying agony. I have seen misery such as you cannot fancy, thousands, tens of thousands, without enough of light or air, in smoky, dingy, dirty dens, lingering on a weary life to make others rich. I have seen debauchery and sins such as we have happily no name for. I have seen wickedness, triumphant, proud, rich, self-sufficient, and I have seen men and women struggling almost against hope, save that one blessed anchor of the human soul, the expectation of a joyful resurrection. I have seen untold misery such as you cannot conceive, and I have seen what is far worse than misery, human souls carried on to ruin by the mad thirst for pleasure. O sad earth, beautiful and glorious though thy God has made thee, what an untold depth of woe is to be seen on thy fair lands. The vast assembly seemed moved to sorrow by my words. A sympathetic thrill went through them. I noticed it and changed the subject, struck at how much my fellow beings felt for and pitied men who were not as happy as they were. In that world, the forms of life akin to our lower nature are humble, small, weak, stupid, soulless. The earth cannot develop the flying type of life to a great size or intelligence. The beings akin to us are smaller than men, and of low sense, as the beings akin to a man, i.e. the creatures who climb the trees, are in our world feeble and despised. The mountains of earth are not as ours. Even the Himalayas and the Alps, those white spots you see on the great continent, are mere hills compared with the ringed mountains of our world. Man cannot even yet fly, but sometimes as a great feat he risks his earth life by floating on a huge gas ball in the air, carried by every current. All on earth clings to the surface, and ever has so clung. Even in the ages long gone by before the days of man, the huge beings of primeval time crawled in the marshes. Only a few birds soar a mile or so in the air, and those birds are thought wonderful, the ensigns and heraldic signs of earth's greatest monarchies. Earth is one vast prison house where all are bound to the surface. What the destiny of earth is to be, I cannot say. Men, the most thoughtful and most holy of mankind, believe it is to be destroyed, to be wrapped in some vast cataclysm, and in the great crash of doom be ruined utterly and eternally. Better, methinks, it should be so. It has its work to do in training up brave souls to endure hardness, to develop in the spiritual combat their hidden nobleness. When that work is done, and enough human souls have struggled, striven, conquered in the agony of that great combat, better that earth should pass away and be broken up and crushed in atoms, and then there will be an end to earth and to the earth life of man, and the strong souls that once were men in the higher life of other worlds will glory in their victory. For their souls are immortal, and if they cannot obtain their destiny on earth, they will in higher and happier spheres. End of chapter 12. Part 2 of Aleriel, or A Voyage to Other Worlds, by Wladislaw Lach-Szyrma. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 13. A Strange Proposal. I came home to my city. I rested there 1/4 of a year. We have no months because we have no moon. Many came from distant cities to ask about Earth and what I had seen or heard. Myriads of questions were put to me, some that I could and many that I could not answer. The pictures of Earth, your cities, mountains, river scenes, and so on, were examined by myriads of our comrades, copied again and again, and copies sent to every city and every museum of our world. My journey was given in writing, and 10 million copies scattered through every country. Many were the comments on it. Some even foolishly suggested that a party of our citizens should go forth as missionaries to your world, to teach men to be better and happier. But I at once checked this idea. The Church on earth does her work, I said, and God deals with men in his way. Our going openly to men would only make them worse, might disturb the good, and form a mere pastime to the wicked. So the wise ones of our world stifled the proposal in its germ. One evening, as I was returning from the service of our course in the great temple of the city, I found our prince waiting for me in my home. With him there was a stranger who, by his robes and insignia, I recognized must be one of the princes of Saldonio, the city of the stars in our northern continent, where the study of astronomy was chiefly carried on, more than anywhere else. "I have long read and reread the narration of your visit to the earth," he said. "It has filled me with interest. It seems to me that the time has come when we may, by subduing the forces of nature, travel from world to world, not only to the earth, but to the farther worlds of our system. Our mechanician Ozoniel has constructed a globe fitted for such journeys, and has perfected your mode of conquering gravitation. My friend Aleriel, one of the leading masters of the laws of nature in our city, will join us." I gave reflection to the proposal. At first, the love of home, stronger than ever since I had seen earth's miseries and sorrows, made me unwilling again to launch forth into immeasurable space. But I was unwilling to deny myself the pleasure of beholding new works of the Creator's love, new evidences of his mercy and his majesty. And also I reasoned that perchance other worlds might be as beautiful as earth, but less fallen and spoilt by sin. So perchance in other worlds I might behold better and fairer things by which I might learn more. I consulted with the chief sages of our city. They were of opinion that now I had been able to pass to 2 of our sister orbs, it should be well to try if we could proceed further. Some suggested Mercury as suitable for a trial, but my own feeling, and that of the great majority of our Senate, was that if we should again plunge forth into space, we should select the outer worlds rather than the inner planet of our system. The gorgeous realm of Mars, and even the huge systems of the giant and ringed worlds, as we call Jupiter and Saturn, might be visited. I went to Saldonio in our air car. It was a long journey of 3 days, half round our world, for Saldonio was in a far-off continent. Thousands of fair cities, vast territories of beauteous vegetation, lakes, rivers, and seas did we pass over night and day. Still on we flew, until at last we reached the mighty mountain ring, upon one peak of which Saldonio was reared. It was built on a plateau of rock some 20 miles above the plains, far above the fleecy clouds which usually cover our planet. Thus the astronomers could usually watch in clear nights the expanse of heaven, and all the wonders therein contained. Around the city, from many miles afar, were to be seen the lower mountains of the chain, rounded into the form of spheres, each of which depicted some world in the solar system, carved over and stained as gigantic models of the planets around us. Close to the city was the model of the Earth, a globe far vaster than any man has ever made, 600 yards around, on which the loftier Himalayas were raised some 4 or 5 inches, and where London was marked as a dark spot about the size of a large leaf. I came to the city, over which enormous instruments of study towered above every spire and roof. It was a wondrous place. All that art could do was done to know the other worlds. They were observed, mapped, examined, measured. Science had done everything save open the gates to visiting them. And now Aleriel was planning that also. He welcomed me in the Palace of the Stars. He showed me the treasures of the city, the results of the studies of thousands of astronomers for many ages past, and inspired me with his interest and curiosity to know more. At last he showed me in Azoniel's hall where his works of mechanism were stored, the globe for a voyage through space. It was a sphere of some 20 feet diameter, of strongest polished steel. At its top there was a rounded door which could be lifted up, and around its equator were 4 crystal windows to observe as we travelled through space. Within were copies of my instruments for conquering gravitation, but of enormous power. Mighty electromagnets were there, and within there was a room with every comfort for the travellers during their long and perilous voyage. In the side were 1,000 instruments of every kind, for observing, measuring, registering natural forces, and so forth. A long bar pierced the base of the sphere, in which were the explosive forces to impel or direct the sphere. It was a wonderful triumph of skill, a little artificial world, as it were, fitted to dart through interplanetary space, with every triumph of our skill and science comprised within its globe and stored in its many cells. All accidents appeared provided against, while the apparatus gave us an immense power over nature. I admired the ether car, as we called it, and felt inclined to join once more in a great expedition into space beyond the Earth's orbit, and into the vast outer regions of the giant planets. I returned from Saldonio to our city, calling as I went on at most of the great cities on the way, and studying in their museums both of the things which might relate to Earth and also to my coming voyage. I talked with the wisest sages of many lands on our project, and on the things we might hope to see, and what should be the special points of our researches. I found the general opinion was that life was universal in the solar system, except in some few of the smaller worlds, like the Moon, on which it had existed but had passed away, or which were as yet not enough developed to receive it. The idea was that, as in the spectroscope, we had seen that the elements of the solar system were everywhere the same as on our world, probably derived from the sun, and, as on your Earth, only the same metals and gases were proved to exist as we had. So also in life, that the same types of life were everywhere existent, only developed more in one world than in another. I satisfactorily had proved that as the metals and the common forces, so the life types were the same in your world as in ours. So also we hoped to find whether they could be traced all through the solar system, just as the metals were traced. End of chapter 13. Part 3 of Aleriel, or A Voyage to Other Worlds, by Wladislaw Lach-Szyrma. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 14. Mars. The Voyage Through Space. At length the day appointed for our departure arrived. We had resolved to start from Saldonio. The ether car was fixed to the central spire of the chief cathedral of the city, one of the highest points of our world. About 2 millions of our Venusians had gathered to behold the spectacle, and now they crowded every vantage point in the city, every spire and tower, every battlement and roof, every square and garden, was thronged with the vast host who had gathered from all lands to behold the sight. Their variously coloured robes and ornaments formed a brilliant scene. It was about sunset. After the tranquil service in the glorious cathedral, and the solemn blessing of the chief priests of the city, we passed forth into the crowded square, and flew up to the spire where the ether car was suspended. A sublime spectacle, such as I have never seen in all my wanderings excelled, opened to my vision. At our feet, for 100 miles or more, stretched the vast Saldonian territory. The lines of mountain chains and rings, the forest-clad hills, and milky lakes. The shadows of evening were already gathering over the low country. For Saldonio was so lofty that it was in sunlight when the evening had wrapped the plains. The lights of 100 cities were just glimmering in the grey evening. At our feet was the magnificent city, a city such as you cannot imagine, though Edinburgh might be mentioned as a feeble parody of it, with its thousands of graceful spires and airy gardens and plazas and public buildings, now one living mass of intelligent beings in their varied coloured robes. It was a scene not to be described in human words. We entered the ether car. The chiefs of the city bade us farewell and gave us their blessing. At a signal from the Prince of Saldonio, the great hymn of praise burst from 2 millions of voices. We cut the bond, developed the anti-gravitating force, and launched into infinite space. I need not describe the long journey into interplanetary space we took. We soon reached one of the meteoric systems which traverse ether in all directions, and swept on by it towards the planet Mars. What you call days and weeks and months passed as we rushed on away and away from the great sun. The time did not pass as heavily, however, as I found it on my former lonely journey. Companionship brightens life even to us, more perhaps than to men, for we Venusians have never anything unkind to say, no quarrel, no bitterness, no selfishness, no pride, no envy to trouble each other with. So we talked, or studied the precious books that Aleriel had stored us with, or compared notes and conjectures what we would see in those other worlds which we should visit. At length we passed the Earth's orbit, but at many millions of miles from the Earth, and then went on, further and further into space, till the ruddy orb of Mars grew larger, and then we severed ourselves from the meteors and restored gravitation, and dashed at immense velocity to that gorgeous world. End of chapter 14. Part 3 of Aleriel, or A Voyage to Other Worlds, by Wladislaw Lach-Szyrma. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15. The Ice Island. Our descent was planned for the great ice island in the Delarue Ocean. It was a bright spot from our world, and so we had chosen it as one suited for a first descent, the more as it seemed isolated, and probably our arrangements would not be disturbed. On then we flew through space till we reached the attraction of the ruddy planet, and could see his mighty expanse of crimson plains, spotted by green oceans and lakes, and veiled in clouds, with either pole robed in eternal snows. It was autumn in the southern hemisphere of Mars then, and the white, glittering snows stretched over the south. But Huygens continent and even Laplace land, ruddy with their mighty forests, glowed blood-stained, as it were, beneath us. On we rushed, ever faster and faster, by the power of gravitation of the world to which we were approaching. How vast it seemed! And yet, as we all know, it is smaller far than either your world or than ours. At length the whole expanse beneath us, the equatorial region of Mars, was red and green. Then the ruddy shores of Copernicus and Galileo continents only were in sight on the horizon, with the two great islands which Earth's astronomers call Tycho's Island and Schroeter's Land. All else was the green ocean, absorbing the sun's rays into its dark emerald verdure. On we flew to the crystal peaks covered with snows of the great ice island. They were huge mountains, not unlike your Alpine group of Mont Blanc and Monte Rosa, a vast region of snowy peaks glittering in the sun, but unlike Switzerland, not set in green, heaving lands, but in the storm-tossed waves of the Delarue Ocean, like the peak of Tenerife in the Atlantic. Down we sank until at last the anti-gravitating power had to be used to stem the impetus, and even when we reached the snowy peak of one of the ice mountains, we struck it with a violence that almost cracked the rock. Our vessel was, however, strongly constructed, and so it was merely shaken. Again I felt the joy of treading the firm ground of another earth. This was the fourth I had stood upon. My native world had even for ages been my joy, a happy abode. Earth I had trodden on and traversed, even in places where man's foot had never wandered, in Arctic snows, up to the very pole itself. I had twice gone round the earth, had seen its cities, mountains, oceans, its sin, its misery, its follies, its conceits. Your satellite I had visited, and wandered, as I told you, over the rugged slopes of Tycho, and clambered the lunar crater range, and crossed the crater of Copernicus. And now I stood upon another world, a world that seemed most beautiful, although further removed than ours or yours from the great source of life and beauty, i.e. the glorious centre of our system, the light-giving sun. We found ourselves on the summit of a small ice-formed mountain, partially filled with snow. Here we placed our ether car and buried it in the snows, so that it might not be disturbed by any Martian who might come across it. Then we took flight to the loftiest peak of the ring, from which we surveyed the country. In the foreground of the strange scene before us was a vast succession of mountains, not unlike icebergs, or the lunar mountains of the South Pole. They were all white with snow, or glittering here and there with icy glaciers. The scene reminded me of some parts of the moon, and of the lofty plateau of the Dofrefeld. But beyond it and below was neither lunar desolation, nor brown plains of moorland, nor green fields and forests, as in your European snowy mountain ranges. As the snows were lost in the low country, vast forests appeared, crimson as blood, or orange-coloured, growing in the sunlight with a rich deep red. They grew on the ledges of the cliffs, under the snows, on the mountain terraces, and lastly stretched down in slopes to the green waters of the Delarue Ocean. We resolved to plunge downwards to these forests. We flew easily to one of the terraces with overhanging cliffs around it. Here we alighted amidst this crimson vegetation. The effect, as the sun shone through the blood-red leaves, was unutterably superb. The very light was tinted to a ruddy glow. All was gorgeous and magnificent. There is a certain majesty and power in the colour of red, which, when seen in large fields, impresses the mind. But no one who has not seen vast masses of red all around, in every direction, above, in leafy foliage, below, in the ruddy, as it were, blood-stained turf, around, in vegetation of quaint forms, but of crimson hue, can realize the inexpressible gorgeousness of this spectacle. A field of peonies or other red flowers would very feebly represent it, for these red flowers of earth have green leaves, and ours have pale and delicate tints. But all was here, as it were, ensanguined in hue. To men's eyes the sight would soon have been wearying, or even maddening. To us it was simply magnificent. It would not be fair, however, to say that only red was present. It is true the very light was tinted with red, as it passed through the ruddy vegetation, but there were other tints besides, and glorious ones, but only enough to vary the spectacle and to make it splendid. Every colour of the rainbow was there, but crimson and orange predominated. Every other colour was, as it were, set in a glorious background of red. The forms of the plants, for such I suppose I must call them, were various, very different from ours or yours. Quaint growths in curious developments of form, yet not without a certain grace and elegance, for all that God has made is good. We walked a little while among these strange productions of nature in all their ruddiness, when I heard a rolling sound, and calling the attention of my companions, we walked towards it, among the quaint cactus-like plants and trees that made up this wondrous forest. At length we saw something green glittering amidst the red foliage. We came nearer to it. Then we saw the cause of the sound. It was the cascade of green liquid that flowed down with crash and noise from the terrace above. Here, then, were the causes of the Martian tints, i.e., the green waters and the ruddy foliage of that which men once called the war planet, not the mere red rocks, like your Devonian red sandstone on earth, but that which everywhere results from moisture and sunlight and warmth, vegetation and vegetable life. This ruddy foliage is not unknown to you. The copper beech is a slight approach to it. The poppy and the peony and the red geranium are better examples, though on a minute scale. And even green is not unknown in earth's seas. I have seen it often when the sun has shone through blue seas on yellow sands. So Mars is not so unearth-like as many planets are. The ice island seemed to be a vast mass of icebergs that had attached themselves to an island covered with vegetation. We resolved at once to leave it for Tycho Island. End of chapter 15. Part 3 of Aleriel, or A Voyage to Other Worlds, a tale by Wladislaw Lach-Szyrma. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 16. Tycho Island. On we flew over the green Delarue Ocean, till at length the white peaks of the ice mountains were lost behind the waves. Soon a blood-red line appeared on the horizon. It grew clearer and clearer. The shores were more and more defined. Then there opened up the long red forests of Tycho Island, the great island of Mars, the largest tract of land enclosed in the green ocean of the southern tropics. It was very glorious and gorgeous. The red forests waved like gigantic poppies or carnations in the breeze. We floated over them. Everything looked unlike what we all had seen on our own fair world, or I on earth. The tints were not the soft, pale tints of our sunny home, nor yet the refreshing green or dull browns of the earth, but glowing, gorgeous red and orange. The shapes of the trees were such as I cannot describe, quaint and extraordinary, a new phase of creation, and to us fresh manifestations of creative power and love. Glorious in form as in colour were those ruddy forests of Mars. As yet we could see no trace of intelligent beings, but after floating in the air for some hours, Aleriel said, "See, there is something like the abode of an intelligence, or of something possessing reason." It was a massive wall of grey stone in a triangular form under some large red trees. Upon it there was a metal roof which glittered in the sunlight. This roof was conical in form and quaintly ornamented. We approached it and passed by a path through the ruddy cactus-shaped plants. The building looked one constructed to resist pressure from without, massive and strong. "Surely," said Aleriel, "this must be formed to resist outward pressure and cast off the winter snows. This is an Arctic clime. The winters must be terrible. And so it would appear the first object of the Martians must be to keep off the snow and to exclude the cold." Under the forest shade as we descended, we saw a figure, half human in aspect, erect and dignified, but gigantic in figure. His face was very like a man's, and like ourselves, but yet he had a sort of lion look also in his limbs. We approached him. For a moment he seemed awed and alarmed by us. The natural shrinking of every living being from the creature of another world was manifest on our side and on his. Yet we felt no antipathy. There was a nobleness and a dignity in his presence, which, though distinct from the soft lovingness of our nature, was not opposed to it. His manner was rather of astonishment than of fear. He looked at us in silence for a while, and then as we halted at some distance, he himself approached us, and waved his hand in the air, keeping still erect, as if in greeting. We made the signs of greeting, and sang, as is our wont, the song of welcome to a friend. He listened as if moved and enthralled. Then in deep solemn tones from his great chest heaved out some words that we could not understand. "It seems that where there is intelligence there is speech," said Aleriel. "Perhaps it always follows the gift of reason." "We have found it so far," I said, "but we may not in other worlds. It seems here reason implies speech." We followed him towards the house to which he beckoned us. He came to it and touched a boss in the outer wall. A portcullis arose at once and left an opening. He beckoned us to enter. We followed him into a domed hall, deeply and closely padded with thick fur-like substances. The door was shaped somewhat like an opening flower, and so were the windows, which were deeply and richly coloured in diverse hues. In the centre was a low metal pillar, apparently of brass, supporting a large plate. On this, directly he entered, our guide lighted a fire, over which he made sundry signs and gestures towards us. "Surely," said Aleriel, "this is their mode of greeting. All seems adapted against the cold, and perhaps the lighting of this fire is a symbol of welcome. Let us imitate him." We did so, and also made signs of greeting close by the fire. He then opened another small door close by, and presently brought with him another Martian, differently attired, but also having a long flowing fur-like robe, with a still greater number of metallic ornaments. Her look was softer and gentler than her dignified husband, and she definitely feared us more. Indeed, she shrank back when she saw us. But after some delay she also came to the fire and made signs over it, like her husband. She then retired, and soon brought to us a crystal vase full of fruits. She held them over the fire, and rather timidly presented them to us warm. They were grateful to eat, warm and aromatic. "You see still," said Aleriel, "the fire symbol prevails. They welcome us by warmth. It is evident that in this world cold is counted the greatest of evils." After we had partaken of the food, we had a short consultation as to what we had better do. Aleriel proposed that he and Aroniel should remain in retirement in that quiet forest district, or in the ice island, while I, profiting by my experience on earth, should endeavour to acquire the Martian language and go among the people. Strange to say, both my companions expressed a great shrinking from the Martians, and as it was understood we were to keep a rigid incognito, we agreed that it was better for me to travel alone, while they studied the almost infinite natural treasures around them. A venerable and majestic-looking Martian suddenly entered as we were discussing our projects. He was as tall as his comrade, i.e. some 9 feet high, but grave and apparently aged. His face was thoughtful, and he had an appearance of authority. Around his neck there hung a large chain, and a silver symbol of 2 triangles. On the chain I traced some of the well-known letters of the alphabet of the heavens. This cheered me. I at once saw that here was one with whom there might be a basis of communication. After greeting us, which he did solemnly, and with gestures evidently of a religious character, he seemed to welcome us as fellow creatures called into being by the same Creator. The thought struck me of a mode of communication. I drew from my vest a tablet, and wrote on it symbols in our hieroglyphic character expressing where I came from. With a little difficulty and some gesticulation, I made him understand our symbols, which expressed the sentence, "We, Aleriel, Aroniel, and Aleriel, come in the ether ship from the beautiful planet near the sun." When he understood what I had written, he said something to the other Martian, who expressed great astonishment and wonder. Then, having paused a while as if in thought, he drew from the fold of his robe a box, whence he took a sheet of a cloth-like texture, on which he traced in large and rude characters, in a system of celestial picture-writing, not the same as ours, but sufficiently like it to be intelligible to us. "Welcome to this our Martian world. Do not reveal who you are, or that you come from the planet near the sun, in the name of God." This confirmed our resolution to keep our incognito. It was evident that there would be danger to others, if not to ourselves, if our nature was revealed. So I symbolized assent, and so did my 2 comrades. Then I wrote in hieroglyph, "I want to learn your Martian language." Here a difficulty arose, for their symbol for language was evidently different to ours. But by gesture I showed them what I meant, and he at once wrote, "Come to my house, and I will teach you." He then made some signs to the female, who went out by another door, and soon returned with a robe much smaller than her own, which probably belonged to one of her children. She threw it around me, and drew a fur-like hood over my head. Evening had now come in. The sunlight ceased to glow through the rich toned colours of the stained windows. The clear sky was adorned by stars in the same constellations as you know so well, for the sidereal heavens are the same for all the solar system. The distance between us and Neptune is not enough to make serious displacement in a single constellation. There was the Southern Cross, and Orion, and Sirius, just as on the earth, all glistening in the darkness, and the ruddy trees were now a very dark crimson, or almost black in the more shady places. We passed along a forest path, with many strange forms looming in the gloom. At length we reached a little hill covered with rocks, under one of which, nestled in a corner, was a domed house such as we had left. My conductor ushered me in. There was a chamber like the other, adorned with many thousand symbols in picture writing all over the walls and roof. End of chapter 16. Part 3 of Aleriel, or A Voyage to Other Worlds. A tale by Wladislaw Lach-Szyrma. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 17. Next morning I commenced my study of the Martian language. The picture writing was not difficult, for the symbols were the same in principle as ours, founded indeed on the basis of geometry or natural symbolism, such as must be almost universal. The circle meant space, the point meant unity, the multiplication of points meant numbers, the equal lines meant equality, the crossed lines meant addition. The picture of the thing meant the thing depicted. It was the same symbolism as was the basis of human writing in the Egyptian hieroglyphic or the ancient Chinese, a small part of which still lingers with you in mathematical and Masonic symbols. It was the language not of a particular world, but of the universe. Still it had local symbols for ideas belonging to that Martian world. These I had to learn, but my instructor soon put me in the way of them by explaining them through general symbols. When I could read the Martian writing, I found there was another, as on Earth, phonetic mode of writing, short and simple as your shorthand, which represented sounds and was in common use. By this I was soon able to learn the spoken language, and thereby to converse with my instructor by word of mouth. The spoken language was very simple. Each syllable conveyed an idea, the consonant sounds representing the idea in its special sense, the vowel sound the part of speech or grammatical inflection. Thus all roots were consonants, all inflections vowel sounds. By this, the idea was in the consonants, and the part of speech, the form of the idea, was in the vowels. Thus, supposing we were to adopt this system in England, man would represent the thought m, meaning humanity, and a, marking a noun, man would be men. Men would be manly. Min, to man, or provide with men. Mon, to be manly. Man would be manliness. And so the idea would be altered through some score of vowel sounds. Have you many languages in your world as we have on Earth? I asked my instructor. We had them once, but we agreed to abolish them and substitute one as near perfection as we could make it. It is far better for a world to have only one language. Now one can travel from land to land without hindrance and converse with people of all nations. It is many centuries since we had diversity of speech. How did you arrange this? We had some ages ago a great congress on this subject, where all the assembly agreed to have one language. An academy was formed to establish a perfect language. After long discussion, a scheme was adopted and submitted to the whole world again, and accepted. This was taught in all the schools, and in time, as the young grew old and died off, the old languages died with them, or rather were reserved for a study of a few of the learned. Since then we have had but one language. It almost looks, I said, as if on Earth, as with you and us, this may in time be the case, for 2/4 of the earth are accepting the use of one language, the English. Perhaps it may in time be dominant, but yours is a formed, not a natural language. Partly so, but only in part, for we still retain the basis of the ancient tongues. Have you any exceptions in your language? No, none. No, none. A rule once given is always preserved. In the old languages, corruptions and exceptions did exist. In the new, none. As soon as we could thus converse together, my instructor asked me many thousands of questions about my world, and also, when he learnt I had been on earth, about yours. He seemed to be of a most inquisitive mind, and anxious to learn all I could teach him about our worlds. It seemed that the first elements of astronomy were as well understood by him as by your best astronomers. Observations had been systematically carried on for ages, and instruments had been perfected. Martians evidently wished, as far as they could, mentally to soar above the little world to which they had been bound, and on which they lived. They had measured the distances of their sister worlds from their own and from the mighty sun. They had examined their elements in the spectroscope. They had watched their movements. I asked him once about the history of his world and what was its past. There was a time, he said, when war raged in our world most terribly. Each of our 4 great continents were separate nations. Each struggled for supremacy. Each strove to attain sovereignty over all the rest, a sovereignty bought at a terrible price. All countries were desolated. Population was reduced to 1/100th. Many evil souls were sent forth from our world unfitted for a higher state. Then God looked on us with pity. Our world was losing her use in this vast creation as the fitting abode of spirits for a while incarnated to prepare for a higher life in happier spheres. Then in his love he sent the Holy One to teach us better. He taught us useful lessons, that peace, not war, was the source of happiness, that love, not hate, was the due of all. But the Holy One taught us also to hate sin and lying, falsehood and gross low pleasure. And our ancestors learnt the lesson. We had been united by force into one state, and now were taught to love one another. Peace was established, but still our sensitive, irritable natures were eager to hate something. We were taught to hate sin, and if needed, to slay the sinner. A great war arose then against sin, and was waged against all who erred against our pristine nobleness. And so the law was instituted that those who erred against truth, or honour, or, in females, against modesty, should be cast out of our world, but yet cast out lovingly, in the hope that in another life they might do better. And so the arts of peace prospered among us. The energy wasted in war was given to science and to progress, to seek to know more, to draw forth nature's secrets, to develop, to ennoble our race, to increase the sum of happiness. And so we prospered. Cities were raised where only forests grew before. The wild beasts were tamed and utilized. Knowledge was augmented, and the forces of nature were subdued to our will. Population increased wonderfully. There were millions where there had been hundreds. Still we sought to increase the means of subsistence, and nature wonderfully answered our demands. Our world began to assume its true position in creation. "Tell me," I said, "what is your government? How do you secure peace?" In the olden days of wars and mutual destruction, as I said, we had 4 great states, 4 great nations for our 4 continents, with minor states on the islands. All these contended against each other. But then, when the Holy One's teachings were established, and peace and love accepted, the first step was to give each of the 4 nations their rights. The great principle of unselfishness was established, and only those who excelled in wisdom and virtue were promoted to positions of trust and power. I should like to see some more of your great cities. May I not do so? Yes, I think you may. Only disguise yourself. It would not be well for you to own yourself to be of another world than ours. It might put some of our weaker ones into temptation. Foolish curiosity could be excited. You would find much trouble for yourself and for us, so you must disguise yourself. So he arranged a disguise for me as a child of the Martians, to cover my inferior size, and stained me to a colour like theirs, and otherwise disguised me so that I could hardly know myself. So one day he took me out again into the forest, and told me that we should go together to the City of the Waters, the capital of the great island on which he dwelt. It was situated between the great Delarue Ocean and that wide lake you call the Lockyer Sea, the point whence Earth's astronomers usually calculate the meridians of the ruddy world. As we walked on, we conversed on many subjects. "We are wont to travel much in this our land," he said, "for our winters are very cold, and in our early state, ages and ages ago, we Martians used to have but one home, and when the snow came and the cold, we used to huddle up ourselves in our houses and cause artificial heat, and so spend the wretched winter. Hence have arisen our fire customs. Now, as science has progressed, everyone, except those who live near the equator, has 2 homes, one in the northern and the other in the southern hemisphere. And also most have an electric ship and car. So when the winter comes on, the family enter their ship and float down to the port of the other home with all their goods. And so it is with each commune. The same friends gather together in the other hemisphere as here, and all home comforts are the same, with the same friends, the same community in the southern as in the northern hemisphere. There, then, we dwell again till autumn comes, when we go back again all together to the old home to find spring once more. We thus live now in constant spring and summer. You are like the migratory birds, it seems, of earth, which never stay for winter. Possibly in ages to come men may be like this, when modes of transport improve. The rich sometimes already are so, cheating the winter in warm climes. From what you said about Earth, said my conductor, and the state of humanity there, I should say it was a world as yet far less developed than ours, perhaps younger in the scale of creation, a younger child of the glorious sun, and yet very like ours. Men appear as yet hindered by sin, wars, bad government, intestine quarrels, and class selfishness from reaching the state in which we are. And yet in our history I can well trace a period many thousands of years ago when we Martians were no further advanced in enlightenment or in the knowledge of what was best for ourselves than you say you found mankind upon the earth during your recent visit. Perhaps the time may come, in thousands of years hence, when the human race may attain something like the state of society in which we Martians now live. The 2 worlds are very alike in everything. In the future, perhaps, men who live in cold countries will usually quit them for summer climes. We had not walked many minutes in the forest before almost suddenly his words about winter appeared realized. The sky was clouded over, the white snow fell on the ruddy vegetation. I cannot describe how lovely it appeared. Above, the leaves were glittering white and ornamented with exquisite snow crystals, but below their ruddy glow was manifest. This snowfall is not unlike, I said to him, what I have often seen in winter time in northern Europe. Really, if it were not for the ruddy foliage, this might almost be a scene upon the earth. Yes, he replied. I was prepared for that remark. The two worlds are very much alike in almost everything, in snowfall, in summer sun and winter cold, in distribution of land and water into continents and seas, in islands and lakes. We even think we sometimes can trace a resemblance in the northern part of one of the hemispheres of Earth to our world. You mean in North America, in Canada, and the lake regions of the United States. It is true, the configuration of the country there is very like what we see in Mars. Meanwhile, the snow fell more and more heavily. My guide led me to a shelter which had been formed by some rocks, and here we waited for the snow shower to pass. We were talking of your continents and islands with which your world is mapped out. Tell me, how can I see them and traverse your globe as I have done the Earth? You advise me to maintain my secret, but I fear my disguise will not suffice me to do what I managed safely to do upon the Earth. Our difference in size alone makes it impracticable. I think we can do it, but you must go with me. Listen to my proposal. When we reach the ocean city, if you desire it, we may embark together on the little electric ship of our commune, which I have at my disposal. I can easily navigate her myself in every sea and port. Is it possible? Can one Martian alone, with a single companion, navigate a vessel round the whole of his world? No man has ever attempted such a feat yet. It is almost impossible. You forget, said my companion. The conditions of the voyage are quite different to those which men would have to encounter on Earth. Our oceans are not so vast, from shore to shore is not so far. Our electric ships are exquisitely constructed to give a complete power over the natural forces. We have but to connect or to disjoin a wire to establish or destroy an immense force. And electricity is, as you know, the key force, the master force of our solar system. By my command of this power in my little vessel, I can go anywhere on the waters and do anything. We reached a shed close to a railroad of polished steel. From the shed he drew an electric car, and mounting it, bade me do so likewise. He touched the electro-motor, and we dashed through the forest. End of chapter 17. Aleriel, or A Voyage to Other Worlds. A tale by Wladislaw Lach-Szyrma. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 18. The Ocean Capital. At length we came to a mountainside, up which the electric engine crept, amidst rocks and cliffs and ruddy woodlands. On a sudden, by a turn of the road, a strange scene opened before my eyes, such as I shall strive, though ill able to describe it in earthly words, to depict. A vast plain lay before us, stretching towards the green sea of what you call the Delarue Ocean. Its surface was not all ruddy, but speckled with great white spots of shining metal, which glistened in the sun, and tall spires and towers varying the expanse. Over it there were extended various ramifications, like a spider's web, of hanging railroads in long lines, crossing and intersecting each other, resting on huge pillars and massive towers. It stretched for 20 miles away or more, sinking into the horizon on one side, but on the others bounded by mountains and the green sea. "Is that your ocean capital of which you spoke?" I asked. "It is," he replied. "Here is the capital of the seas. But we have several other cities, great as this, and even still more beautiful. The capital of learning you shall see in the great northern continent. The 4 capitals of the 4 continents are each as great as this." "The greatest city I have yet seen," I said, "is on the earth. It also is an ocean's capital in some sense, the centre of the earth's trade. It has 4 millions of people in it."
What is the population of this? 5 millions and more. But they extend over a vast extent, far vaster than that great city on the earth. Perhaps so. But you see, we do not crowd our people. Each one of the 20 wards of this great city has its public park and gardens for the health and enjoyment of the citizens, to give them the contact of nature even in the city, which is the right of every living creature. Every dwelling is isolated from the others to avoid fire and to give free ventilation. Every street is planted with trees. So the city extends over a huge extent, as you perceive. But see, we are passing its borders, the ancient fortifications reared in the days of war. We came to a mighty wall, almost a little mountain ridge of rock, carved in quaint style, and flanked with triangular towers, on which still were placed curious engines of war, which appeared worn out by age and falling to pieces. They have left these as a memory of past times. We destroy nothing of the works of ancient days, but they are mere curiosities now, useful to remind us of the errors of our ancestors, and to warn us to keep in better paths. How many thousands have been launched into eternity upon and before these walls, but all is over now. War never can return. We dashed over the ridge and then along the hanging road, passed over the city on, as it were, a thread of rail. Clusters of towers and thousands of glittering metal roofs, mostly dome-shaped, and curious gardens full of trees of every form were beneath our feet. Some of the gardens were on the roofs or on the fronts of houses full of flowers, while between not a few of the towers were massive chains, from which hung here and there baskets of creeping plants of every hue, which sent their perfume up to us. It was a beautiful scene of many colours and forms, where art used nature for her purposes. And nature in that world is as lovely as it is on earth, or even almost as with us, though so very different. The colours were richer and more glowing and less delicate, but still they were splendid. Deep crimsons, rich browns, dark purples, massive-looking greens. The air seemed full of hanging gardens of flowers and plants, beneath which, as through a net, one saw the many-shaped roofs of houses and towers and spires of public buildings of every kind. "It is something like a city of earth," I said to my companion, "but far more splendid. Paris men think their finest city, but Paris is nothing to this." We stopped at one of the towers and then descended from our car. We went down the stairs into the city. The street was wide, but shaded from the sunlight by long avenues of red-leaved trees, or rather plants, for they were not trees like Earth's trees, though vegetable products. Their huge leaves spread over the road, and the sunlight glowed through them in blood-red tints. It was a scene such as would almost madden some human beings to dwell in that intense lurid glow, and yet it was glorious in its gorgeousness. In the roadway, made partly of shining metal, partly of rocks, laid out in mosaics of varied designs, and polished, there were many Martians going to and fro, some in cars, some on foot. Their cars were electric, for they use the master force of nature very extensively, and employ it to cause the lesser and inferior forces, such as heat, motion, magnetism, at will. The electric cars darted hither and thither on the metallic rails, with their violet sparks clashing from their electro-condensers, varying the scene of glowing splendour with their rapid motions. All around was glow and motion and sound, almost as great a contrast to the soft, sweet calm of our cities as to the busy but sad and gloomy tone of yours. And yet there was something glorious about it, and I can easily fancy how those accustomed to such a world, and fitted for it, might immensely enjoy existence in such a cheering scene. We entered through a massive arched doorway into a fine vestibule lighted by coloured windows. Thence we passed into a room where there reclined on a carpet a huge and majestic Martian of apparently venerable age, wrapped in a vast cloak. I noticed that these Martians showed their lion nature in reclining on the ground, crouching as it were. Man sits, for man is linked to the scansorial mammals or the apes, but the Martians, in rest, lie down or crouch as lions on the floor. I was presented to my strange host, who was told in a few words of my secret. He expressed surprise at a being from our bright world having crossed the vast chasm of space. When I showed him really who I was and cast off my disguise, he asked me many questions, prefacing that I need only answer him on points which were lawful to be spoken of. He inquired much about the earth also, and entertained me some hours in conversation. Then he gave me his blessing and wished me all success, but bade me most earnestly not to reveal myself, nor to let my secret be detected. Evening was drawing in, and we went forth again into the busy city streets. The electric lights were shining on every side, and blazing on the rich red foliage and the domes of the houses. At length we came to the waterside. On the green waves there were floating many thousands of large vessels of graceful shape. My conductor led me to a little ship close by the shore. We alone embarked on it. In a few minutes an electric signal blazed from the prow, and we plunged forth on the Delarue Ocean. Soon the lights of the ocean city grew fainter in the distance, and only the sea was around us, heaving with waves much like Earth's ocean. Overhead there were the same stars as you know, but both the moons were shining together that night on the waters. We two were alone on the deep in our little electric ship. We were not long out of sight of land. Lights, as of cities and towns, were on either side of us. We were passing up what you call Dawes Sea, between the two great Galileo and Huygens continents. The scene was such as I can scarcely describe. There is nothing on earth like it. Around us were the green waves, varied by forests of algae of many colours, which tinted the waters into the semblance of a vast and glorious garden, while beyond, on either side of the long and narrow inlet, were the ruddy shores of the two continents, with their crimson forests covering hill and dale, varied here and there by distant ranges of snow-capped mountains, soon lightened by the sun. At length we came to an island rising out of the waters, with many vessels lying around it. It seemed quite built over. Thousands of towers and spires and domes of all glittering metals rose from the ruddy gardens. Strange and majestic edifices with richly ornamented facades, as different to anything in our world as to the scenes of earth. "That is the sacred city," said my guide, "the great centre of our religion, where the Holy One once dwelt when with us, and which we honour for his name. As you also are a servant of the one eternal God, as you are a brother in the same eternal church that he has formed, I have brought you here to adore him in our holy place, to pray in your own way and in the way of your bright world for God's blessing." "It is well," I said. "I have prayed at Jerusalem on earth. I now shall pray at the holy city of another world." To prevent detection, we did not land till night had set in, and then we went from our little ship through strange scenes and processional avenues of mystic import to the great temple in the centre of the city. It was a magnificent edifice, but quite impossible for me to describe. Huge in massive grandeur, richly ornate, with singular designs of colossal size. It was partly of rock, partly of metal, and most of its ornaments were imitations of natural objects, for the Martians hold that the highest conception of beauty is in the works of God, and the best they can do is to imitate them. It was a wonderful scene that opened to my eyes as I passed that portal. I had known for ages the soft and peaceful worship of God in our blissful world. I had joined in the adoration of all the temples of our great cities. I had mingled my voice in the hymns of all the nations of our world. The grand ideal of our adoration is peace and beauty and joy and repose, the soul lost in an ecstasy of peace and thankfulness. I had also, as you know, joined with men in their worship, imperfect like all things on earth are imperfect, by man's sin, and yet, in spite of all defects, having the shadow of higher things. I have adored in most of your greatest fanes. I have been at St. Peter's when the silver trumpets have sounded and the grandest music on earth has welcomed the presence of the pontiff. I've seen Cologne and Rheims. I have mingled with the adoring hosts in St. Isaac's at St. Petersburg and the Cathedral of Kazan. I have seen the worship of the Armenian Church of the Copts and Abyssinians. I have joined also with the simpler worship of your English Church, more like ours than the others on earth in being so congregational, but unlike ours in being so imperfect. I have been at St. Paul's and Canterbury and York and Ely and your best churches. I have seen the worship of nearly all the Protestant sects, still more imperfect in beauty, still more didactic, but further still from ours in want of reverence and love and beauty. I have even seen the most defective and darkened of the heathen rites, some of mingled causes, evidently of the earth most earthy, the temples of India, the mosques of Sambul and Mecca. But all these were unlike this new spectacle of the adoration of the creature to the Creator. It was as splendid as ours, but its splendour was gorgeousness, not repose. Its spirit was passion, not peace. Its aim was enthusiasm, not simply reverent love. Let me try to describe it, though I feel how defective earthly words are in describing any except earthly thoughts. The temple was vast and magnificent. 100,000 of the Martians were there in state robes of worship, for they specially vest for religious worship, the males on one side, the females on the other, two vast armies. The immense domes to which your St. Paul's and St. Peter's at Rome were mere molehills, rose in exalted elevations over the heads of the hosts. All the walls, the pillars, the domes were encrusted with crystals of many colours, but all dimly visible in a dull light, which seemed to leave everything obscure. The service began with a procession in gorgeous robes, and as they approached the central dome, the whole building shone in a blaze of electric lights. Then from 100,000 voices burst the loud roar of song, too crushing to be melodious, and the blare of many trumpets made it seem as if the vast edifice could crush us. Then down on the ground the vast host fell adoring, and all died away, and there was silence. Then came soft, sweet melodies, and the light grew softened by degrees, till we were again almost in darkness. Then again the host was silent, and the one voice, a mighty voice as speaking to us in silence and in darkness, was heard. I think I caught his words. Adore him, O creatures, adore him by whom is all, in whom is all, whose ye are, adore him for his love. Soften and still the evil voice of passion in your souls, that all may be hushed before his presence. We did not stay long at the holy city. My conductor seemed to doubt whether he ought to declare to me the mysteries of their religion, and I feared to inquire, for it is our belief that each of the worlds has its special dispensation, designed by the great Creator of all, and that to inquire into the dispensation of God's will in other worlds would be mere curiosity, and harmful, if not sinful. The same thought seemed to be in my conductor's mind. So I neither asked nor did he explain the strange, mysterious sights we saw, and we merely passed through the city and saw its myriad worshippers crowding its vast streets, and the huge temples with their sacred symbols, some of which I could understand and some I could not. It was very grand and glorious altogether, though as different from the religion of our world as from yours. And yet truth is one as God is one, only the truth is reflected from different standpoints by diverse minds. If, as you see, there is such a diversity of religions upon earth, you need not wonder at the variety of the reflections of truth in finite minds in other worlds. And yet amid the higher developments of being, the higher forms of mind, I have found more unity in the conception of things relating to God, i.e. between ourselves and the Martians, and the wisest and best of Christians that I have found among men on the same earth, some of whom by stupidity misconceive the things relating to religion, and others by their sinfulness are obscured in their perception of it. So as in the material fabric of the worlds of our solar system there is an essential unity amid an infinite diversity, so in the conception of religion there is an essential unity among the noble and good of all the worlds, though their modes of expression of their ideal may differ. End of chapter 18. Aleriel, or A Voyage to Other Worlds, a tale by Wladislaw Lach-Szyrma. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 19. The Voyage of Circumnavigation. We sailed on over the airy sea till we saw the varied white and red outline of Laplace land, white because of the snows of the Arctic continent, but rendered most beautiful by the red vegetation, when the cold had not killed vegetable life. We crossed the Arctic Circle in the Fey Sea, and then, bordered with glittering icebergs, shining in the sunlight, rising from the green waters, the long ranges of snowy mountains of the Arctic continent appeared in all their grandeur. The scenery was very splendid, but at the same time not quite unearthly, for you have something like it in Europe, in the northern shores of Norway, which so many now visit to watch the midnight sun. The rest of Mars, however, is missing upon Earth. The rich combinations of white and crimson, two of the most beautiful of colour combinations, the white slopes of the Arctic continent blushed like the cheek of a fair girl brightened by a momentary excitement, while the green ocean and fantastic glittering icebergs formed a magnificent fringe to the blushing slopes of red and white. We coasted for some days along the Arctic continent in these splendid scenes, passing sometimes vast submarine forests of algae, which tinted the green waters and made its colour change to such a degree that even your telescopes can notice these tinted spots upon the green ocean of Mars. The ocean was not lifeless. Amidst the icebergs sported huge monsters of the deep, and now and then electric ships of the Martians dashed past us. The ocean was not lifeless. Amidst the icebergs sported huge monsters of the deep, and now and then electric ships of the Martians dashed past us. At length, having sailed through what men call from their astronomer's name the Beer Sea, we crossed over from the icy Arctic continent and its superb natural scenery to what you call the Herschel continent. Here we sailed up the narrow channel between it and the Copernicus continent, back to the warm and ruddy regions of the tropics. Sometimes the shores of both continents were in sight, with towers and cities rising out of the rich crimson forests. The hum of industry could be heard. The channel was filled with the electric ships. My companion told me the names of the many cities we were passing, till, crossing the equator, we pushed on out of sight of land to the great Newton Ocean. We crossed the Tropic of the Lion, for that is the southern tropic of Mars, as yours is the Tropic of Capricorn. Then came to the great island of the Southern Ocean, which you call Secchi's Land. The winter was coming on.
Thousands of vessels filled with their freights were sailing down the Zollner Sea to bear the Martians of Secchi's land to more favoured lands. The snow was already appearing. However, we pushed on rapidly to near the Antarctic Circle, where the sea was already nearly a mass of ice floes, into Phipps Sea, just sighting the Antarctic Isle, now clad in snow, of Rossland. Then pushing down the Terby Sea, we once more came in sight of Webland. "Tell me," I said, "how you arrange your exchanges of material things. On Earth there is a use of bits of gold and silver, which are stamped to represent a certain amount of things which are wanted, as food or clothes, and people who have many of these bits of gold are called rich. But in our world of Venus there is, by a beneficent providence, such an abundance of everything that there is little need of exchange, and all our gold and silver are used for ornament. How do you regulate the supply of things that are wanted?" There was a time when we were in our imperfect state, when war existed and selfishness and all its evils, that we had a system of exchange and barter, and bought and sold as it seems men do now. Each laboured for himself and his family, and for them alone. The strong prospered and the weak suffered. But now we arrange that nothing shall belong to the individual, but all to the community. All that is wanted is supplied from the common stores. How do you provide against indolence? On Earth some theorists have held this view, but it never has been found to answer. Human selfishness is too great. Each man would grasp all that he could from the common stores intended for all, and some would idle when others would have to work. We have stamped out selfishness in our world, or nearly so. The first point in the education of our little ones is to teach them to be truthful and unselfish. If, when they grow up, they have found to have failed to learn the lesson, we first punish them as liars or selfish, and if they are incorrigible, send them through the Tower of Doom out of our world. We pray for them, but we slay them. There is no room in our world either for liars or selfish people. It would be well if they could get rid of them on Earth also. Men suffer crime to fester in their midst and to pollute society. But tell me, how do you govern your state? By the rule of the wisest. Those who excel in wisdom and virtue are promoted to power, but they are never suffered to use their power for their own advantage, but for that of the community. We do not choose by popular election, but by competitive examination. The wisest of our mathematicians and those who excel in calculation are given the care of the treasures. Those physicians who are proved to excel above others in physiology are given the care of sanitation. The most able architects the care of public buildings, the greatest botanists the care of the forests. The chief object of the state is to secure the greatest possible happiness to the greatest possible number. And to do this we require the highest available scientific knowledge in each department. I think you are wise. One of the greatest thinkers on earth, Plato, thought it would be best if philosophers were kings or kings philosophers. Men now derive much of their trials and sorrows from giving power to political empirics, who know how to talk or to intrigue or to toady or to cringe and flatter, and then by their stupidity misapply the power entrusted to them, or else use it for their own selfish ends. You are wise in giving power to those who know the most. But is power hereditary with you, as in a majority of the lands of earth? As long as the son proves himself worthy of a wise sire, I do not see why he should not possess his father's privileges. But we find sons and fathers often dissimilar, so we never put a son into his father's position until he has proved himself worthy of it. Then you do not recognize the family as the basis of society as much as men do. I found among more cultured races, and especially in that continent so like your world which men call America, a tendency against this family basis. But here is a danger from engendering selfishness by making individuals live for themselves and struggle for themselves. The strongest prosper, the weak are crushed. In our world, duties are balanced. Each individual has his duty defined to himself, to his family, to his village or civic community, to his nation, to the whole world. The community is the most important basis. The family is too small, the nation too large. But the sphere of duty is really balanced to all relations. In our earlier state, each lived for himself. Then wars arose and mutual assistance was required. Since we have had universal peace, we have tried to insist on each realizing his duty to all society and to the whole world. You spoke of common stores. How do you fill them? I asked. It seems to me there's a great deal more idle time and amusement in this world than on Earth. Most of our work is done, as you see, by our control of natural forces. We convert the storm and the ocean wave into electricity, and by this we have a vast, almost an immeasurable, command of power. Thus we can do our work, control and turn nature to our will with little effort. So the more our control of the forces of nature has increased, the more leisure we have found for recreation, for development of the inner life, for study, for mental improvement, for relaxation. There was a time when our ancestors had to labour very hard, and life was one round of endless toil. Then the rich and the strong made the poor and weak labour for them. But since we have reached our present state, we have been able to adjust labour wisely, to give all their fair share of work and fair share of healthy recreation, and to get our efforts aided by the forces of nature subdued to our will through the master force of electricity. You have done wisely, I said. Perhaps in time man may do the same when he has advanced further in knowledge. How do you divide the day in your communes? I asked. 1/3 is given to work, if required, which it rarely is, 1/3 to amusement and refreshment, 1/3 to sleep. That is on our working days. On all feast days there is no work, but only recreation and devotion to God's service. On working days, an hour out of the working time is ever given to prayer and praise. What do you understand by recreation? It is left to the individual taste. The government provides amusement. We have no need now to fritter our means in armaments. In every village, in every town, there are bodies of trained musicians who nightly perform music for their neighbours' amusement. For music we regard as an important element of happiness. Then every village has its theatre and its body of actors, and where scenes are represented nightly for the recreation of the people. Then we have games of many kinds, mostly to develop the energy of the young. Lectures or speeches on subjects bearing on science are delivered by competent teachers. Then we have books and libraries for the enlightenment of all. Everything, of course, is provided by our rulers, one of whose chief duties is to provide healthy amusement and recreation for all. Then again, in most of our villages, we take our meals together in a common hall. All work for the common good, and all are fed from the common stores. But to do this, we must have perfect unselfishness. How do you manage with regard to the relation of the sexes? On earth, this constant throwing young people together would be fraught with danger. Where the females are not taught modesty, it would be so. But modesty and self-restraint are, after unselfishness, the first lessons we inculcate. But there is a great advantage in letting the young people of both sexes mix together and know each other well before they marry. So we soften the character of the males by friendly and supervised conversation with the females. How do you manage about marriages? There is the chief difficulty in the societies of earth, and men have diverse ways of dealing with it in diverse nations. We expect those who wish to be married to know each other many years before the marriage is completed, and to obtain the consent of the elders. We had many such conversations, which I cannot now describe to you, but the more he told me, the more I thought that in many things men might learn from the Martians, a class of beings not unlike men in many things, and living in a world very like your Earth, but further advanced. When passing Webb's land, I asked if I might see one of the common feasts and recreations of the Martians. After some delay and consideration, my friend assented, on condition of my being very careful about preserving my secret, and not of exposing myself to detection. He promised to show me the hall of feasting and the hall of recreation of his own commune when we got back to Tycholand, which we did next morning. End of chapter 19. Part 3 of Aleriel, or A Voyage to Other Worlds, a tale by Wladislaw Lach-Szyrma. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20. The Feast. He led me through a large garden, overshadowed with ruddy foliage, amidst which could be seen flowers of every colour. It was a most gorgeous scene, but the colours were glaring and almost feverish, less pleasing to me than the soft tints of our lovely world, and even than the grateful green verdure of the earth. Here all was glowing, and the very sunlight burst through leaves blood-tinted on the red ground. It was magnificent and gorgeous, but it had at last grown wearisome. Amid all this were the green cascades and fountains of the Martian waters, making a striking contrast to the red. At length, about a mile off, we came to a large palace with lofty facade flanked with metal towers. We entered its portals. There was a huge hall, as huge as any in Europe, with galleries around. Here were a number of Martians crouching on cushions on the ground. My guide led me to a place, and here we sat down ready for a meal. The loud blare of a trumpet sounded, and then a report as of a cannon. Then all stood as in an attitude of adoration, and there swelled a strange and mighty hymn of praise to God, the giver of all good. Then all reposed again, and the meals were laid before each. Messes of food such as you have not on the earth, and as I cannot well describe. The very elements were somewhat different from those which men require in food. One thing was peculiar. With our meals was served out in cups a ruddy fluid of fragrant odour but metallic taste. I asked my guide what it was. It is a blood mixture made by science to represent the elements of our blood. In our early and defective state, when war existed in our world, we used to kill animals and even drink their blood. We were to a great extent carnivora. Now this is changed. Science provides us the same elements as flesh, and we can live on mere fruits with the aid of this metallic compound, which is more grateful and, I think, more suitable than the flesh or the blood of dead animals. It does just as well. After the feast we went forth into the next hall, and I saw many strange sights, not easy to describe. The Martians seemed a race full of energy and of high development. Many games of skill were going on, and as the young Martians cast off their garments, I saw that they were really not so entirely like men as they seemed when clothed. Their limbs were more muscular, and they had more hair about them than human beings. When clad, as I said, they were extremely like men. Their heads were quite human in intelligence, but the lower limbs showed as much resemblance to the carnivora as the human limbs do to the quadrumana. I passed from here into another hall, very splendid and ornate, where music was going on, and then into another, where a drama was being performed. Another hall was beyond, where science was expounded, and beyond this we came to a library with books. Everything showed that the Martians, though they had to work, as men have, still strove to make life pleasant. It is impossible for me to describe all the strange sights I beheld on Mars while I traversed again, with my Martian friend, the oceans of this strange world. Earthly words are only fit for earthly things, and so are imperfect and therefore deceptive when applied to the things of another world. There were, however, many matters on which you might learn from the people of your sister orb. The main point I learnt there was that all our three worlds are in many points akin, but that Earth is the least happy of the three. With us little evil exists, On Mars, though there may once have been quite as much as on Earth, and the Martians quite as wicked as men, yet nearly all great evils have been put down and stamped out by the courage and good sense of the Martian rulers. If we are better than men, the Martians are braver, and so have crushed evil, which you have left to fester horribly, and render Earth one of the most miserable of the many worlds that roll around the King of Day, our mighty sun. I saw on my journey many wonderful things, great cities, long straight ranges of hills, and equally straight lines of inlets and sounds of green sea, forests and fields of many forms and of varied vegetations, hundreds of fine rivers, of green waters, and canals without number. The land of Mars is nearly as extensive as that of Earth, the seas being much less, and so there is as much to see of interest on Mars as on your world. Indeed, there is more. Larger populations, more developed civilization, a society more advanced in intelligence, progress, and good government than any you have ever yet known on Earth. Thanks to my friend, I was enabled to see a good deal, and yet to keep my secret unsuspected. But, except on the occasion I mentioned, in his own village and at his request, never went to any place of public resort, nor did I venture to converse with the Martians, except when obliged to do so. I thus had more restraint put on me than in your world, where I managed to disguise myself perfectly and mix freely with mankind. I appeared only as a child under the tutelage of my guide, and such a disguise was essential to me. At length, having seen much of this strange and beautiful world, we returned to Tycho Island, and I parted with many prayers and blessings for his welfare from my kind Martian friend. I again joined my companions Aleriel and Aroniel, whom I found near where I had left them in the rendezvous awaiting me. They had seen most of the natural beauties of the planet, having flown from mountain to mountain, mostly by night and at great heights, resting in remote and inaccessible places, lest they should be discovered. Perhaps they had had more bird's-eye views than I had had. They had visited both the North and South Pole, even in the regions of perpetual ice. Once they had noticed me sailing in our little vessel over the Turby Sea. Their far-seeing instrument had enabled them to detect me at a great distance, but they had purposely made no sign by which I might recognize them. They had examined the peaks of the loftiest mountains of Mars, and had flown over most of the great cities, both by night and by day. Once or twice they thought they had been noticed by the Martians, but on each occasion had soared out of sight directly. They had also collected many specimens of curious things. We flew together to the mountain where we had left our ether car, and then once more, developing the anti-gravitating power, darted forth into space. End of chapter 20. End of part 3